Hello everyone and welcome to Peru. I'm greeting you today from Ollantaytambo. Ollantaytambo, it's very windy. In today's video, we're going to take a look at the stone quarries of Peru here in Ollantaytambo. We have a lot of walls, including the ones behind me, that were made from pink granite. But where does this pink granite come from? Well, it comes from over there, from the other side of the mountain. Today in the video, we'll closely examine everything we know about these quarries, since we actually know a lot. At Ollantaytambo Machu Picchu, we marvel at the stark beauty, precision, and size of the stones. The Inca culture has its origins in the Cusco Valley, and for a few years, the Incas remained confined within their boundaries, ruling a minor agricultural state. But under the reign of Pachacutec, they left their territory to embark on an empire-building enterprise. Many have compared it to the Romans or Egyptians. In fact, in 1483, Pachacutec ordered that Cusco be completely redesigned and built in stone. And that's how we have the Inca style that we all know, with Sacsayhuaman, the stones of the walls of the city of Cusco, or here, Ollantaytambo. It's true that Inca construction techniques have long sparked wild speculation, but research on ancient quarry sites and on many carved stone walls reveals that the astonishing Inca constructions were probably made with much simpler means than they appear. Yes, and all of this we know thanks to experiments that show that with certain methods the stones could be carved, with a little less effort than we might imagine, and also in a little less time than we might think. This is an exclusive video I'm sharing today, especially for the most passionate viewers. If you want to be part of the next group that I'm organizing and supervising here in Peru, don't hesitate to check the video description where you'll find the detailed link with all the necessary information to join the next departure. So the granite blocks of Ollantaytambo, let's go! At the time of the Spanish conquest, the Inca Empire extended from Chile to Ecuador at its peak. Comparing the Incas and Romans is significant. It is based not only on the size of their empire and the military feats by which they conquered it, but also on the massive construction program they carried out. The Inca builders used a wide variety of methods to construct their architecture. They were highly skilled in building and using adobe walls, stone walls bound with mud, and most importantly, dry stone walls made of cut stone. It was in this last area that they excelled and reached unparalleled levels of perfection. The cut stone walls were often cyclopean in size and were assembled not only without cement, but with a precision that often reached the millimeter. The craftsmanship of Inca stonemasons was not limited to technical aspects. The aesthetic appeal of their work was also evident in the geometry of the joints and the variety of wall textures. How did the Inca stonemasons, who had no iron tools and did not know the wheel, cut and fit the stones before building the walls that are so admired today? This problem can be stated more succinctly with questions about the following operations, starting with extraction. What kind of stones did the Incas select? How did they extract them, and with what tools? Then, how did they cut and shape them? How and with what tools were these operations carried out, and in which locations? Then, the placement and assembly. What techniques and devices did the Incas use to assemble these stones? And finally, the handling and transportation. How and with what devices did the Incas transport and lift the building stones? Rest assured, we will address things in chronological order from a logistical point of view. So we will first tackle the extraction, then the shaping. And at the end of the video, so a little patience, but it will come, you'll see, it's quite extraordinary. At the end of the video, we'll tackle the installation. In what order and how were the blocks placed to be able to shape these extraordinary cyclopean walls that we find at Ollantaytambo, at Sacsayhuaman, or in the city of Cusco? Quite simply, based on the research of Jean-Pierre Protzen in the Cusco region, we can provide answers to the first three operations. This research consisted of analyzing numerous Inca walls in Cusco and its surroundings, as well as visiting several ancient quarry sites. Special attention was given to the quarries from which the Incas extracted the stones used in the construction of Ollantaytambo and Cusco. The choice of a particular type of rock must have been of utmost importance to the Incas. Otherwise, they wouldn't have used such remote, hard-to-reach sites that demanded strong organization. The Cachicata quarries next to Ollantaytambo haven't changed much since they were first visited in 1863, and their descriptions from that time match modern observations very closely. You reach these quarries by a ramp that goes down from the Ollantaytambo site to the Urubamba River and then climbs up the mountain on the south bank. Along the entire length of the ramp, there are about 80 abandoned blocks, and most of the access road is fairly well preserved and easy to follow. The figure on the screen shows the part of the south bank of the road and its branches to and from the 3 quarry sites. Just like Little Poussey, thanks to Jean-Pierre Protsen's survey, we are able to trace back meter by meter the path that connects Ollantaytambo to the quarries, which are very close by. The cartographic sketch of the Rumicolca quarries, which were used for the construction of the walls of Cusco, reveals a network of roads or ramps leading to different extraction areas. In both quarries, the Incas complemented the access roads with additional infrastructure work. At Cachicata, they built large retaining walls to protect the quarries from falling rocks, and perhaps to prevent the larger blocks from sliding down from higher places. A feature that seems to be unique to the Cachicata quarries is the existence of stone cutting and temporary storage sites, which are separate from the extraction areas. Protsen found at least 3 of these sites strategically located just below the point where the access ramps to the quarries meet. Many red granite blocks are still deposited there. This may be the place where the blocks from the quarries were checked to ensure their suitability, and later cut or shaped according to a plan. In both quarries, the different extraction areas correspond to specific types or qualities of rock. The Cachicata quarries are the ones that supplied the red granite used in the large structures of Ollantaytambo. Most of the blocks abandoned along the access roads are of this type, so this is always confirmed at Cachicata. The Incas did not practice quarrying in the strict sense of the word. In fact, they did not cut stone from a rock face, nor did they detach it from the bedrock. The quarries simply went through a kind of giant landslide, carefully selecting here and there the blocks that met their needs. Once an appropriate block had been identified, it was only minimally shaped before being sent to the construction site. The finishing work and adjustments seem to have been done later and directly on the construction site. Often work had begun on a block even before the access ramp was completed. Some blocks still lying on the ground prove this. At these quarries in Rumicolca, the quarry provides a specific type of andesite. Most of the sidewalks in Cusco are still paved with slabs from this quarry. The cut marks on these blocks and others are quite intriguing. They are very similar to those found on the unfinished obelisk of Aswan, or at least in the Aswan quarry, and the technique used shouldn't be very different from the one employed by the Egyptians. Namely, a few diorite hammers, but very few picks. Indeed, tools are rare at this site. It was only in 1983 that Protsen discovered hammers, some of which were made of quartz. It's a hard rock. The rocks found in the west quarry of Cachicata are a grayish granite. Very few large blocks left behind on the ramps or at the construction site are made of this same material. Nevertheless, local tradition maintains that this is the true quarry of Ollantaytambo. A surprising feature of the Rumicolca quarry is the presence of numerous blocks at various stages of production. Some of them are nearly 7 meters long and have a cross-section of only 5 to 6 centimeters thick. The way these stone needles were extracted remains a mystery. The way some of them are scattered shows that long blocks were divided and repeatedly subdivided into blocks with increasingly smaller cross-sections. But how? There are no identifiable tool marks on these worked stones. The needles were not hammered like the large blocks were. And what were these needles used for? Some locals say they were used in the construction of the bridge over the Urubamba River. However, this explanation is questionable. Curiously, in Ollantaytambo, there are no such needles abandoned on the ramps leading from the quarries to the construction sites. The only blocks in Ollantaytambo that fit this description are the lintels at the entrance of the fortress. At Rumicolca, unlike at Cachicata, there is actual quarrying. The rock is directly broken from the bedrock or extracted. The area is still widely exploited today, so unfortunately, much of the evidence of ancient activities has been erased. At Rumicolca, again, there is a preserved pit in an inaccessible area that shows almost no signs of modern extraction activities. The pit measures about 100 meters long, 60 meters wide, and 15-20 meters deep. The remarkable feature of this pit is the presence of about 250 cut stones finished and ready to be shipped. Spread around 4 main extraction areas, the pit produces 3 distinct qualities of rock. First, there is a layer of larger rock, a material that seems to match the one used in the small-scale masonry of Cusco. Just below is a layer of light gray or brown rock. This rock is considerably denser and very fractured. The lower layer has the best, densest stone in large pieces with a rich dark gray color. Extracting this stone does not present any major problems. Even the densest quality is still fractured enough to be easily extracted. To break it, the Inca quarry workers may have used bronze levers like those found and displayed in some museums in Cusco or Lima. There are many examples at Rumicolca showing how the stones were separated from the natural rock. There is strong evidence that dry wooden wedges were driven into certain holes and that water was poured into the grooves. But neither at Rumicolca nor at Cachicata do we have sufficiently conclusive evidence to confirm that the Inca quarry workers used this technique. The only positive indication found of the use of this technique was on red granite blocks found on the ramp leading up to Ollantaytambo. The rock was cut in a way that strongly contrasts with the split rock from the Machu Picchu quarries, which has well-cut holes of regular shape and size. At Rumicolca, unlike at Cachicata, the stones were generally finished or almost finished on 5 of the 6 sides, directly in the quarry. Once extracted, how are these stones cut and then set upright? Among the many blocks in the pit we talked about, you can see blocks at every stage of production. From the raw to the roughly cut, including the partially cut and the finely shaped. So it's easy to imagine what the chronology of the different processes used might have been. During Pratzen and his team's missions, enough tools were found on the sites to be absolutely certain about the techniques used in the cutting and shaping process. As surprising as it may seem, the tools were simple river pebbles, used as hammers. For example, they were found in very large numbers scattered loosely around the andesite flakes. At Rumicolca, no fewer than 68 tools were found. The hammers were easily identified because they are foreign to the site, both in their shape and their petrological characteristics. Some are made of pure quartzite, others of granite, and some of basalt. Their weight ranges from a few hundred grams to 8 kilos. Their hardness is comparable to that of the andesite on which the hammers were used, but these hammers are more resistant than the andesite, which, due to differential cooling during its formation millions of years ago, breaks much more easily upon impact. The origin of the hammers is most likely the nearby city, in Vilcanotas. Many river pebbles are also found on the northwest side of the Ollantaytambo quarries. The largest of the hammers was used to break and square the blocks from the quarry. The fact that the splitting technique was used for shaping is evident when you observe the scars on the actual blocks. The finishing was done using medium weight hammers to cut the surfaces, as well as to rough out and finish the edges much more precisely. You still need to verify your claims. You can't just make random guesses with this information. Alright, to do this, Prodson went from observation to experimentation, starting with a raw block of andesite about 25 cm by 25 by 30. He first knocked off the largest protrusions using a sandstone hammer. This hammer weighed about 4 kg and allowed him to obtain a rough parallelepiped. Only 6 blows were enough for him to complete this step. The next goal was to shape one face using another hammer made of the same material, weighing about 4 kg. Still holding the hammer in his hands, he then began to hammer one face of the block. Shaping the stone in this way is essentially a process of crushing the rock. However, if you direct the hammer at an angle between 10 and 15 degrees, tiny chips break off and the shaping process speeds up considerably. The efficiency of each strike is further improved by increasing the impact angle to about 40 to 45 degrees just before the hammer hits the surface. The mechanics of this process are easily explained, in fact, when the hammer is directed vertically onto the surface. All the force of the strike is converted into compression, which crushes the rock, or at worst, can even split it, which can be problematic. But as soon as the direction of the strike deviates from the vertical, the force spreads out. The greater the angle of impact, the greater the shearing. It's the shearing component of the force that breaks off the small chips. Also, you might think that handling a 4 kg hammer for a long period would be very tiring work. However, it's not necessary to support the entire weight of the hammer while using it. By taking advantage of gravity and the tool's own mass, you can simply let it fall onto the surface you're working on, guiding it with both hands. Moreover, on andesite, the hammer bounces back by a centimeter or two and can be caught directly in your hands. The stonecutter can then direct the hammer to the next spot he wants to hit, let it fall, catch it, and so on. If he wants to work faster, he can give the hammer a new push with each catch. Even in this case, the effort involved in drop hammering is rather low. Working the rough block up to the stage of a roughly shaped face only took Jean-Pierre Prodson 20 minutes. When one face of a block has been cut, the block cannot simply be turned over to cut the next face. The large hammer may chip off big edge pieces. To get around this problem, the edge must first be roughly shaped with a small hammer and with glancing blows away from the edge. You can only resume flaking one face after roughly shaping the edge. Prodson shaped the experimental block's edges with a 560-gram hammer. With hammers of this weight, gravity can't be used effectively, and as a result, nature doesn't benefit from the rebound. The hammer has to be held firmly while hammering, and the force of the blow depends on how hard the mason swings the hammer. To avoid pain and possible injuries later on, the hammer should be held with the palm of the hand parallel to the direction. So, after drawing the edges, Prodson dressed the other two faces. By dressed, we actually mean shaping them more precisely. When trying a few other hammers weighing between 3.5 and 4 kg, these hammers didn't give the same results. One of them, poorly balanced, bounced at unpredictable angles and was very hard to control, while others simply didn't bounce enough to be used effortlessly. Nevertheless, shaping 3 sides and cutting 5 edges didn't take him more than 90 minutes. So that's really exceptional. Experiments show that stones can be extracted and shaped with simple tools, with little effort and in very little time. Is this how the Inca stonecutters worked? There is abundant physical evidence that they used techniques similar to those developed in Pratsen's experiment. Similar marks to those found on the Rumicolca andesite block can be seen on all Inca walls. No matter what type of rock on limestone, the marks show a whitish discoloration. These white spots are the result of partial metamorphosis of the limestone caused by the heat generated by the impact of the hammer. In each case, the marks become finer as you get closer to the joints, while in the center of the stone, they are coarser, suggesting the use of smaller hammers to actually work the edges. If the stones found by Pratsen were indeed used as hammers, there should be signs of wear, not only on the hammers themselves, but also on the ground in the form of chips or shavings. We always check everything thoroughly. He marked a 2x2 meter area and inspected it carefully. He then found surface debris and pieces of andesite. In total, there are 43 fragments, all of which match petrologically with the hammer stones found at the quarries. So there is no longer any doubt. His only doubt about the hammering technique concerned the concave edges. How could you hammer concave angles? At Rumicolca, he found a small, elongated tool that dispelled his doubts. This fine tool made of hard quartzite was used as a hammer, as it shows signs of wear on the ends. The hammering technique is reported by at least one documentary source. Garcilaso de la Vega, a 16th-17th century chronicler, wrote this: "He had no other tools to work the stones except for black stones, with which he shaped the rocks by hammering them rather than cutting them." Although there is no doubt that the hammering technique was the predominant method of shaping Inca stone, there is evidence that the stonecutters knew other techniques for working with rock. For example, many building blocks at Ollantaytambo indeed have very smooth, highly polished faces and edges, while the rest of the surfaces show the familiar marks we have just described. This polishing may have been achieved with pumice stone bars, some fragments of which Pratsen found in a section of Ollantaytambo. There is a stone block that appears to have been sawed. In fact, the stone was not carved at all. The supposed saw cut is just a quartz vein that has been partially weathered. However, a few hundred meters from this stone, at a place known as Inca Masana, there are a number of genuine cuts. These cuts are the result of abrasion, not crushing or hammering. They may have been made with some kind of saw or file. The cuts are actually made up of two smaller channels, with a thin ridge between them, which was broken off outside of Pratsen's surveys. You'll forgive me, I'm sure. There are almost no illustrations of these secluded or currently inaccessible places. In Ollantaytambo, there are good examples of polished stones. As mentioned earlier, most of the red granite blocks lying around have areas that are very well polished. This indicates that the marks on the stone in question were not the result of polishing, but rather of some form of sawing. There is other evidence throughout the territory explored by Pratsen which shows that the Incas sometimes sawed stones, but we still don't know what tools they used since the remains at the sites are missing. The next question, and the most intriguing one about Inca stone masonry, concerns the incredible precision with which the blocks were laid. For the purposes of this discussion, a distinction will be made between bedding joints and so-called lateral joints. Regarding the bedding joints, Pratsen made an observation that can be stated as a general rule. The bedding joint of each course is cut on the upper face of the course already laid in order to best accommodate the block that will be placed on top. The rule is that the upper courses project into the lower course. There are occasional exceptions, like Ollantaytambo. But even such exceptions do not prevent the fact that it is mainly the lower course that is cut to fit the upper course before it is put in place. Everywhere walls have been dismantled, you can clearly see the cuts made in the upper surface to receive the next course of blocks. Such cuts are the clear refutation of the often advanced hypothesis that neighboring stones were ground against each other to achieve a perfect fit. Clearly, grinding wouldn't cause those marks. So how was the fit achieved? Again, to better understand the technique involved, Protzen tried to do it himself. The experiment required 2 blocks of andesite, the one used in the cutting experiment we described a little earlier in the video, and another, larger block on which the joint had to be carved. The face of the small stone in the figure shown on the screen is the one for which the joint had to be carved in advance. On the large block underneath, Protzen started by placing the face to be fitted onto the lower block and tracing its outline. After tracing the joint, he hammered it, adjusting and hammering repeatedly. Gradually, you can achieve as precise a fit as you want. The illustrations on the screen compare the fit Protzen achieved in this way with an actual fit in one of the walls of Cusco. For Protzen, it only took him 90 minutes to finish the fitting. So the technique of fitting the 2 stones together is a trial and error technique. He also admits that this technique seems tedious and laborious, especially if you think about the Cyclopean block of Sacsayhuaman or Ollantaytambo. However, it should be remembered that for the Incas, time and labor were probably not a major concern. Protzen's experiments and reproductions show that with a little practice, you develop a very sharp eye for matching the surfaces, so the number of attempts can be considerably reduced. The proposed method really works and has the advantage of not assuming the use of tools or instruments for which we have found no trace. Finally, this technique is also supported by at least one observer in the 16th century, José de Acosta, who wrote the following in 1589. What I admire the most is that, although these stones are not regular but very different from each other in size and shape, they fit together with incredible precision, without mortar. All of this was done with a lot of manpower and a lot of endurance in the work. Because to fit one stone to another until it fit perfectly, you had to try the fit several times since the stones were neither regular nor solid. Protzen assumes the method for laying lateral joints is similar to other joints. The new block to be placed is set on top of the blocks already in place. Sacsayhuaman perfectly demonstrates the combined effect of laying all the joints. And it takes away some of the magic from the famous 12-angled stone in the retaining wall of Inca palace. The question of lateral placement raises some questions about the sequence in which the blocks were laid. The sequence certainly becomes critical in masonry with irregular fittings, as on all Inca walls. To study the laying sequences, Protzen once again examined one of the walls of Sacsayhuaman. Assuming that laying the first row, except perhaps for block 1, was simple, can we reasonably assume that blocks 16 and 19 were laid before blocks 15 or 20, and that block 34 had to be in place before block 33 was laid? Or even block 26 in place before block 25 was laid? By examining the second row in detail, that is, block 16 to 19, block 19 had to fit first with block 10, then with block 20. As for the sequence in which blocks 16 to 19 were laid, Protzen suggests that this row started from both ends, with block 18 as the last stone placed. Protzen thinks that some keystones were also inserted from the front, because an opening was discovered in the second wall of Sacsayhuaman. Since the width of this opening, left by a missing stone, is larger at the bottom than at the top, this block must have been inserted from the front of the wall. Each course of these walls turns out to have a block that can reasonably be considered as such a keystone. Blocks 15, for example, 30, 35, and perhaps 25 and 28. The course formed by blocks 20 to 57 does not have a keystone because it didn't need one. In fact, block 57 is a cornerstone that could easily be put in place at the last moment. For its part, cornerstone number 1 was probably erected after blocks 2 and 11 were put in place. For several reasons, his conclusions about the placement sequences are not supposed to be definitive. First of all, it is necessary to analyze more walls, since a single wall simply does not constitute a sufficient sample. Still, we must recognize Protson's genius. By understanding the order in which the blocks were laid as well, and perhaps most importantly, definitive conclusions about the laying sequences can only be drawn after conducting careful movement studies on the available space and the degrees of freedom left to move the blocks and put them in place. This significant problem raises new questions about how stones were handled and transported during the Inca Empire. New questions that we will keep you and I for a future publication on the channel. There you go, my friends. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for watching it all the way to the end. And until we meet again on the channel for new fun filmed directly in Peru, take care of yourselves and above all, don't forget to keep the passion alive. Bye-bye!